today we're talking about key recruitment, people that are going to play pivotal, if you like, roles in an organization. I just wonder, could you start by outlining the fundamental questions an employer should be asking themselves when they begin this type of recruitment process?
Yeah, Chris, thank you. Yeah, I mean, some of this sounds very obvious when you say it, but I think it's fair to say that it's often overlooked, sometimes in the sort of heat of the moment, the speed or the need to recruit somebody. I think the questions are, why are we looking to recruit? Are we, for instance, looking to recruit to bring in new skills that we perhaps don't have in the business? Is there an issue perhaps in a team or in a division, maybe around underperformance or behaviours or culture? Are we otherwise saying, actually, we need somebody that's going to perhaps be a unifying force? Somebody, maybe you've got some disparate work groups and you need somebody who will come in and do that. Is it somebody who's going to really kind of come in and change things? You've got a big change program, not just from an HR point of view, but you need the managers who will sort of support that. So there can be a range of different reasons as to why we might want to recruit. And I think then that then leads into the question of what is it we're looking to recruit? And particularly, for instance, is it likely to be of a short-term duration? It's very often the case that if you need to make quite fundamental change, actually you need a short-term appointment, which might be a year or 2 years, to, as it were, effect that change. It will sometimes ruffle feathers, but then things need to settle down, and you might need a manager or someone with different skills in that change process, as opposed to subsequently, perhaps when it's more a maintenance sort of process. So it's the why are we looking to recruit, and that will tend to drive what it is we are recruiting, what skills the person needs, and indeed, as I say, perhaps how long is the appointment going to be.
But what does that sort of recruitment process look like? It's clearly not an advert in the local paper. It's something far more involved than that. So if you could share a few thoughts about the pathway you would be looking to go down for this sort of high performer.
I think, I mean, you say not the local paper, but actually, interestingly, the local paper historically has sometimes been quite a good source. I mean, the world has changed massively, obviously, with coronavirus, but the idea sometimes of being able to recruit somebody who perhaps now doesn't have to commute and they see the job in their local paper, that might be kind of quite appealing. But the usual routes at senior level would tend to be headhunters, and they certainly have their place. They can be very kind of useful. They can help that sort of targeted approach, and they tend to know, their stock in trade is knowing who those candidates are at that senior level. Obviously, LinkedIn has become increasingly popular at most levels now, it's fair to say, in terms of recruitment. Whether if itself it would determine who you were going to recruit, it might help identify, you might be able to identify perhaps who is somebody in perhaps a competing business who you might think has got the appropriate skills. Obviously, you've got specialist recruiters, recruitment agencies. Word of mouth, I think, actually can be quite helpful. People probably shy away from it nowadays because there are, of course, all the concerns about ensuring that recruitment is done fairly and transparently and from a sort of anti-discrimination point of view. But word of mouth, I think, can be helpful in that sense of giving a degree of kind of recommendation and reassurance that this person is at least worth considering. I mean, if you think about it, when we buy all sorts of other services, a word of mouth recommendation is probably as valuable as anything on the internet, as it were, in terms of, or even just what other people say about you on LinkedIn.
And you know, assuming we've got the person that we wanted, but how do you incentivize and retain key talent like that? I'm sure it's a far more complex consideration than just offering them more money, although I'm sure that plays a small part.
Yeah, well, as one of my former colleagues used to say, the money is the principle of the thing. I think you can't get away from it. It's certainly true that it's said money is one of those kind of hygiene factors. So it has to be there or thereabouts. And if it's not there or thereabouts, then you just won't see the quality of candidate that you want. But I think then in the context of what might the overall package look like, I think again, this comes back to the role, its duration and the sort of person you're looking for. Clearly, if you're saying we want somebody who's probably going to come in, make a big difference over a couple of years, and then probably will exit because they will have ruffled so many feathers that they just kind of need to move on. Well, probably sort of long-term share options and other things for them are not the appropriate way. It's going to be much more probably focused around outcomes, around sort of cash bonus type arrangements. On the other hand, if you're getting somebody who's perhaps you really want to come in maybe as part of a kind of a succession plan, then clearly the opportunity to gain equity is likely to be quite high on their list. What I would just say though briefly about equity is really important. It's so easy to promise or indeed grant or gift people equity, granting perhaps when maybe they have to pay something for it in terms of exercising the option, or gifting it if literally they are gifted shares. Do have to be so careful, because depending on the company, its sophistication and structures, having disputes between shareholders can be really kind of quite awful. So maybe you bring somebody in, you think they're going to be a successor, you say, here's 20% of the stock, 25% of the stock. And then after a period, you find that they're not what you wanted, or indeed you decide you want to do something else with the business. You've then got somebody else who's got and holding this stock. So if you are going to do something like that, you do need to be very sure that you've got a proper shareholder agreement in place, which deals with if the majority wants to sell, that you don't have the minority basically holding the bus up, or indeed holding you to ransom.
And looking ahead, do you see any tensions, I suppose, in the dynamics between the organisation and your high-performing new recruit, mindful of the new ways of working because of COVID?
It's a very interesting one, and if I'm honest, Chris, I don't know the answer. I think we're all feeling our way a little bit. I mean, you'd often say, just going back to the sort of, you know, how do you attract and then retain people? You'd often say that, yes, it's the financial. People then want sort of recognition one way or another. That might come from status. They tend to want opportunity to develop. But the fourth area is often talked about historically is flexibility. Now, the question really is, in those key roles, to what extent can flexibility work effectively? Obviously, over the last 12 months, most of us have been working remotely. But, you know, managing a team remotely, developing people working remotely, it is quite hard. So again, I think you have to be careful that you don't overpromise what somebody can do, because you may find if, for instance, you say, yeah, it's fine after the first 3 months when you've got to know everybody, you can work remotely from wherever you like. Is that actually going to work? Because if part of their role is not looking over people's shoulders, but is being present and being visible, obviously it doesn't always have to be in person, but that may be quite difficult to achieve. And psychologically, I think for other people in the team, if someone's working remotely, and in some cases we're seeing even working abroad when working remotely, I guess that's how that's going to impact on the dynamic. And how does that work also within the senior team, where I think personal relationships and personal rapport can be, you know, critical. You have to build and maintain that. And working remotely can obviously impact on it. But as I say, don't have the answers yet. And I think these are the challenges over the next kind of few years about how do we overcome some of these issues in terms of the integration, in terms of training and developing, when you have managers who are perhaps spending at least some of their time working remotely.